In this video, we'll be covering Chapter 9, Section 3, How do Labor Unions Support the Interest of Workers? Organized Labor. In this chapter, we'll talk about labor unions and how they work, the benefits, the disadvantages to them, and we'll also have an opportunity to finish up our game of labor job. So this is where we're starting, Section 3, Organized Labor. Also in the notes, you will have to watch 2 news clips. These links are also located on Schoology, so you'll be able to observe those and answer the questionnaire as you go through the notes and also watch those 2 news clips. Okay, so what we've done so far is we've talked about labor. We kind of talk about what's considered the labor force, the characteristics. We looked at how to calculate the unemployment rate. We looked at labor demand. We looked at labor supply, equilibrium, how they all work together, skilled workers, and now we're finishing up this chapter with organized labor. So here's May 1964 for our game, A or B, and there's your letters. If you need to pause the video, please go ahead and do so to look up your code. Next, June 1964, A or B. Choose your box there. Labor unions. So there are advantages and disadvantages to them. The advantages, they make sure that the employees are respected, they receive benefits, and they get better working conditions, and they have collective bargaining. And we'll get to what collective bargaining is here in a minute. But the disadvantages, every paycheck that comes out, a portion of that paycheck goes towards dues or fees that goes to the labor union, which then is used to help lobby members of Congress, help those who are on strike, organize, so the management team behind it, and then union activities, barbecues, safety, whatever it might be when it comes to that. And the idea behind it is to keep things united. So there are fees that are included when it comes to be part of these unions. So how did it kind of all start? Well, it started during the Industrial Revolution. During that time, workers were being taken advantage of. Working a 16-hour day was normal. Working 7 days a week, 6 days at least, 7 days was not considered too common as well. And the working conditions were quite terrible. We've mentioned the book Upton Sinclair before, the meat packaging industry and how terrible it was during that time. So things did need to get organized and things did need to change. As a result, workers began forming these groups known as a union. And as a result of that, they were able to use their power to go against the employer, and that was known as a strike. And basically everyone stops working, and they will continue to stop working. They'll sometimes protest around the building and want their demands met. And if they're met, they'll come back to work. So kind of the individual who got this started was Samuel Gompers. He was very key in making sure that rights were being followed. And he started the American Federation of Labor. If you notice in our game, we've mentioned things as yellow dog contract. And here's what it is. So the employers, the way they resisted their workers from creating a union was he'd make them sign a contract. So if you're taking this job, you have to sign this contract and to promise that you will not join a union. Because if you do, as a result, we could fire you. So as our game goes, if you got stuck with this at the beginning, you could not join a union when it came to this. Also, the employers would go to the court system and state that they need their workers in order to operate, and the courts could actually order these unions to stop their strike and return to work, which has happened in the past. So employer resistance. There's an article, I want to have a chance really to read it, but I'll sum it up in your book. It basically talks about a factory boss's viewpoint on his workers, and basically he looks at them as machinery, which is not ethical in any situation. And as a result, unions began to form in the 1800s to battle back to make sure that things were being done in a justified manner. All right, July 1964, A or B? Here is July 1964. August 1964, A or B? There's August 1964. So, things that were taking place as time progressed with these labor unions, corruption began to set in. The mafia was actually involved in some of the corruption that was taking place with some of these labor unions. The dues were actually being spent to fund crime. So things were passed to really help battle and make sure things were being done correctly. So the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 was passed, allowing states to pass measures that allowed the banning of mandatory union memberships. So some states, some unions in certain states said if you start this position, you are required to join a union. So a law was passed saying that's not accurate. You cannot force workers to do that. This actually happened in Wisconsin, and Scott Walker, who was the governor of Wisconsin, actually created a law stating that people were no longer required in the state of Wisconsin to be mandated to join a union. And as a result of this, union members were so upset that they began to protest. They began to congregate outside of the Capitol building of Wisconsin, and they got enough people to sign a sign-up form. I can't think of the exact word at this moment, but sign a form stating that they want a re-election. They want to go again. And they got enough signatures and able to do that to try to eliminate Scott Walker. Well, they were able to do that, and they had another election. Scott Walker actually won again, but by a bigger margin the second time versus the first time. So they really tried to eliminate his power, but the people were behind him. They liked the fact that he was saying that you did not have to be required to join a union, which was excellent. Where we usually find these traditional strongholds of labor unions, you'd find these more in blue-collar workers, more manual labor that is out there, manufacturing jobs. So as a result of that, labor unions are going down because we don't have as many blue-collar workers as we used to. I apologize for this. The reason behind it is that a lot of the work that is done in factories is now as a result of technology advancing. It's now robotic, so it's no longer needed. And then white-collar workers, you don't find as many labor unions in white-collar because they tend to be more salary-based versus hourly wage. Okay. Apologize here that pop-up. No, it went away. All right. So there are some tools. There's a process that takes place before a union goes on strike. So there's something called collective bargaining. And this is where the union boss management and the company management come together to negotiate a new labor contract. So this took place with the nurses' strike in Minnesota. So the union heads got together with the company management to negotiate a new contract. The negotiation was over the health benefit package that the nurses were receiving. Health Partners, who was on the company management side, was saying that it's too expensive to be able to provide this type of health care for its nurses. So that's why a lot of this went on strike, was over this benefit. But they had a collective bargaining where they came together to talk about wages and benefits, working conditions, and just making sure things were more secure when it came together. These are the 3 bullet points that takes place in this collective bargaining to make sure things are being fair. September 1964, we're almost there. September 1964, A or B? There's your letter and your number. October 1964, A or B? All right, labor and management. So, collective bargaining is what takes place in order to avoid this. Now, let's say that a worker doesn't belong to the union, and as a result of that, we would call that individual a strike breaker. You usually don't find too often, if the type of workers are at a certain position, you don't find a lot of strike breakers. Everyone's usually on board with the union. So let's say there was a nurse in Minneapolis at the hospital that went on strike. Let's say that they were not part of the union. They would still keep working up to that time. They wouldn't be a part of the union. But then the union does not represent any workers that are not a part of it. So it's kind of a two-edged sword there. Yes, you don't have to pay your dues, but at the same time, you're not protected if something happens. So what takes place if collective bargaining, they don't agree? Well, the next step is mediation. And mediation is where they bring a neutral person in to meet with both sides, and they hear both cases, and then they try to come up with a settlement or a solution where the union and the management of the company has a negotiation. So maybe let's say that the union wants a 12% increase in pay per year, which is outrageous, and let's say the management only wants to give them 1% increase. Well, this mediator can come in and, okay, let's maybe say 6% is fair on both sides, then goes back, explains this to both sides of the union and the management, and now they have this. The next step that takes place, if mediation cannot be negotiated, both parties are being unreasonable, arbitration can take place. Arbitration is where that neutral third party listens to both sides and then makes the executive decision what's going to take place. And the executive decision that takes place is law. It is legally binding, meaning that the company and the union cannot change it because they hired this third party to come in and do this on purpose. So oftentimes, so if nothing took place with the nurses union, let's say they did mediation, it went nowhere, arbitration could have taken place, that would have taken over to do this. If you ever look in a credit card offer in the back, it actually talks about arbitration, hiring a third party. If you're misrepresented and the company can't get along, arbitration takes place there as well. November 1964, A or B? Last, December 1964. That is it for Section 3, Chapter 9, talking about the labor movement. Please make sure that you watch the 2 news clips that are attached in Schoology as well in order to be able to answer all the questions. The Game of Labor is required to turn in on Schoology. There is an assignment called Game of Labor. So please make sure you give me the shareable link, turn it in to receive credit for the game. If there's any questions, please let me know.